apologize for the sound issues we experienced earlier, but let me go back to our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna. This is the big story. We're talking about 100% transition rate from primary school to secondary school. Education Cabinet Secretary George Magoha is on record saying no child will be left behind. But then there are several challenges that are being associated with the 100% transition. The latest being the fact that the government has allowed principals to increase school fees. So what we're looking at is that parents will now pay 69,402 up from 53,554, and the Education Cabinet Secretary says this will go a long way in developing infrastructure in several schools across the country that have now been sort of stretched because of the 100% transition policy. So let me bring in our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna. I did mention, Sophia, that 100% transition rate is good, because each and every child must be given an opportunity to move to the next level. But then education experts also have issues with how the government has been able to implement this, because then we're having several issues that shouldn't even be there in the first place if proper planning had been put in place.
Exactly, Linda. And so let me bring in my guest this evening, Julius Melly. He's a chairperson of the Education Committee in the National Assembly. And Linda makes the point that on one hand, having this 100% transition from primary school to secondary school is a good thing. But now the challenges it's facing already, in as far as now parents being called upon to pay more fees, speaks to a government that went into a policy, implementing the policy without proper planning, so that we don't have a CS on one hand admitting we actually do not have the capacity, and on the other then scrambling to make it work whilst being implemented.
Yes, thank you, Wanuna. I think the whole policy of 100% transition is not a new thing to this government. It is something that the successive governments have tried to do it. One of it in the 2003-2008, we had the free primary. It was actually a movement towards the 100% transition. And indeed, by 2008, the government came in on a 100% transition. As we talk currently, as members of parliament, we oversight the Ministry of Education. We do agree, a number of us who from our constituencies and even from our own daily work as members of the National Assembly moving across the country, there is serious problems of infrastructural issues of 100% transition. That is why when we came back to the National Assembly in the budget making process, actually the National Assembly asked the ministry to increase the 100% transition. Two, we also asked the ministry or the National Assembly to ensure that every year there is an employment of over 5,000 teachers. And on top of that, there is the 10,000 intern teachers. All this is actually to cushion and to make 100% transition a reality. On the same note, I think across many schools, dormitories are full. We have even triple deckers. Exactly. We have even dining halls converted into classrooms. We have a serious crisis. Even the toilets and everything are not enough. What we asked the ministry last year, and as a committee we were very serious on this, is that to make 100% transition a reality, the government has to come in a big way. That one, you must provide the requisite basic structures of classrooms, laboratories, the teachers, and you must also provide the play fields. You can't overcrowd students. For example, a school with around 400 students, then all of a sudden in a 2-acre piece of land, all of a sudden is 800 students. On that, you can't allow these students again to be so much overcrowded, and they can't play, they can't do anything. You can't just herd them to the schools.
So then let me ask you this. Should then your committee have oversighted government and the Ministry of Education as far as saying, don't put the cart before the horse, at least have this level of infrastructure and personnel ready in secondary schools before you then roll out this 100% transition? Because then you're rolling out and then running quickly to play catch-up.
No, not that actually, Wanuna. One thing is, by 2016, 2017, when the whole process, we started the whole issue in 2017 actually, when the first 100% transition started going to school, then 2018, 2019. Now we are on the third year. Let me take you back a bit. By 2014, 2015, the transition rate was almost at 70%, 80%. So we had about 20,000 students who could not go to schools. So I think the government, in its own wisdom, and I think also we all support this, that it is actually good to take all the 20,000 students to school because we can stretch and we can accommodate them by additional classes. And that is why they came in with massive infrastructure projects, what we call the transitional infrastructural grants. It was given across most of the schools in the country. Let me not say 100%. And then the CDF also came in. And then the government, through what we call the RMI, they gave every student 6,000. Though it is actually an infrastructural improvement facility, they gave them that so that they can enhance the construction of dining halls, of classes, of dormitories, of science laboratories. So that was actually aimed at that. And two, I told you that we as a committee also asked the government to ensure that teachers are availed. And if you can look at the 2 successive years, there has been a concentration of recruiting teachers for secondary schools. 5,000 last year, around 10,000 last year. There is around 5,000 this year. There will be more next year so that you cushion on increased student enrollment and then the teacher-student ratio on the curriculum-based establishment. You realize that this year also they are recruiting also interns because the shortage and the increased capacity has really overstretched the sector. That all that is being done to cushion quality because it isn't enough to take students to school and they are not being taught and they are not getting the requisite teaching learning process. So that is that's what the government is doing. And what the ministry, what my committee is doing is to really put the ministry on toes to ensure that all the facilities that are there, all the schools that are under enrolled are actually getting students. All the schools that have actually not having enough facilities, now we are really trying every other stakeholder to come in so that they are put up. Yes.
Yeah. So then do you say for the students who have been part of the first phase, the last 2 years and now this year, 100%, then get to suffer low quality because they are still teething problems? As you said, the ministry is working to show up the numbers in personnel, infrastructure, but in the meantime, there are these people who are sitting in classes that has 100 or having to go into makeshift buildings, some even under a tree. We've had some members of parliament speak of their constituencies. So they get then to suffer because of poor preparedness?
I don't sure they suffer, but let's look at this. Having a student out there with no education, not having gone to school, which one is better off? I think they are far much better off when they're in a classroom than being idle out there. That too, this student, the government has come in with the textbooks. This year, the Committee of Education has actually instructed the Ministry of Education to ensure that we have science equipment distributed across all schools in the country. So if you go back a bit, I take you back in the 60s and the 70s, when they were trying to introduce mass education to schools, the government, the government, through the Harambee effort, asked communities to build schools. That was in the direction to improve transition or make sure almost everybody goes to school. In the 80s, you realize they removed the school fees in primary schools. And then you come now to the year 2000, they now encourage everyone to go to school. And our constitution in 2012 said education is free and compulsory. Yes. So what I'm just trying to put across, Wanuna, is this, that whereas there are issues, there are teething issues, we cannot say students should remain at home. We are putting on pressure the government to ensure that classes are provided, students are given the teachers, the minimal resources that are there are actually audited and used well, so that we have enough schools, we have enough staff, and the students are being taught in those schools. Yeah. Yes.
And so now we have the minister allowing for the parents and principals to charge these parents a little bit more to help with the infrastructure development in the various schools. How, in your view, do you balance fine, the parents contributing, it's their students, but that not being abused, so that shouldn't there have been a needs assessment in every school? So, we are looking to raise this kind of amount of money, and so parents will need to pay this much for this long? Because it can also not be forever that now, because this is prone to abuse, and we've had the CS also touch on that before.
I'm a proponent of free education. I'm one of the proponents. And the reason why I'm saying so is that if we go back and we allow schools to charge levies, to charge fees, actually we are not going to achieve what is expected for in the UNESCO Convention, that we expect all the citizens of the world should go to school. So that is why in our last parliament, the Committee of Education actually was a member in the Kilemi Mwiria task force. And we asked the government to increase capitation in secondary schools from 10,000 to 22,000. We also asked them to do that so that not a single child in day secondary schools is charged except for food, which is a local arrangement with the parents. So when you say the minister is trying to bring in the issue of charging again, it is now trying to make the sector, not education, to be difficult. You remember we brought fees from 100,000 in around 2016, 2014 to almost 60,000, which is manageable. You see that? So now if we are going to allow them again, we will make education a privilege for the few. So we are the proponent. I'm proposing that let education be actually available for all. Let me just make something on this. That look at the unit cost of keeping a child in school. In a national school, it should be almost the same across the country. Though there are some national schools that have a lot of facilities that is expensive to maintain, but it should actually almost the same. The county schools and extra county schools should be the same. So why should a school have an excuse of charging extra? Two, if we are to arrive at that, and that is where we are going at, we are supposed to make sure that as we move forward, we should ensure that schooling in this country is free for all students without any charge. Yeah. So this issue of coming to charge again, we are really against as a Committee of Education. And as Kenyans in general, noting the hard economic times that we are going through.
So how will you hold then the minister and the ministry to account on this particular issue, because he's given that directive? Yes,
we are really going to hold him to account, especially on the increase of fees, because there was a presidential directive on that matter. There was an agreement, and I think the whole nation was told the issue of raising fees doesn't arise. Let education be for everyone, not for the privileged few, not for the wealthy, not for the class service. Yeah. So when you look at the free-day secondary school, for example, which is actually getting 600,000, the bulk, over half of the current students are going to go to free-day secondary schools. They are only charging around 3,000 shillings for lunch, for example, per term, or 2,000. It depends. That one is actually possible. Some homes can be able to raise that. But there's no any other charge they are supposed to charge. So when you ask them, when the ministry now gives the schools, the board of management and the teachers the leeway to open the gates for fees, you will see what you will actually hear some schools going back to the 100,000 school fees. Yeah. It is more expensive to take a student for 1 year in university. It is more expensive to train a student in secondary school for 1 year than to train in a university for 4 years, yeah, which is not actually acceptable.
Right. Finally, in bigger picture, so you have 100% transition to secondary school. After these masses, these numbers come out to the job market, again, unemployment is what many of them are facing. Because if now these are the ones in school now are struggling with the quality they are getting, we know it's a big, huge, big problem in the country around unemployment. In terms of think through, because I know you've been to Israel and looking at how their models are just around making sure it's a wall-to-wall think through of education. What for you needs to happen in a wholesome looking at one's education?
Yes, education, and I think this is actually a concern for all nations across the world, that an educated citizenry is actually a productive citizen. An educated individual can be able to understand policy very well, can be able to interpret, can be able to really work and be productive in the society. Even in terms of lawmaking and even in maintenance of security, it is good to have an educated workforce. But let's come back to our country. If you'll realize that we have certain gaps, that education in this country fails to link with industry, that will train these students on knowledge, especially from all the way from kindergarten to university. They just acquire information, but they cannot synthesize and apply the same information for productive use. You'll realize that you get an ICT graduate who is out of university, bring him to the field, you'll realize that he has issues on applications. That's an example. To link an agribusiness student to real-life situation where he can produce and he is able to make sure he's going to grow the economy himself is another thing. But so we need to really make our education system to be transformed in a way that it is going to make the citizens produce for themselves, create employment, and even run a very productive society. So it is something that actually the gap that is missing now, and we really need to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mheshimiwa. Honorable Julius Melly is the chairperson of the Education Committee in the National Assembly. And in fact, in as far as the question around should parents pay more to facilitate and these infrastructural projects around the various schools just to increase that capacity, because it's one of the biggest challenges. He says, as Parliament, they're opposed to the same because it should be affordable, free education for all. So you are watching The Big Story here on KTN News. We are taking a break. When we return, my colleague